Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Before the stone was cut to form the pyramids, before the great temples of Karnak rose from the dust, and before the first scribe set reed to papyrus to record the names of kings, there was the Delta. To understand the goddess Wadjet, one must first understand the landscape that breathed her into existence. It is a world of water and light, a vast, flat expanse where the mighty Nile River, exhausted from its long journey from the heart of Africa, finally fans out to meet the great green sea. Here, the air is not dry and preserving like the desert sands of the south. It is thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of life and decay. It is a place of mud, of silt, and of impenetrable thickets of papyrus that sway in the northern breeze like a restless ocean of green. This is the land of the lower kingdom. In the ancient tongue, it was known as Ta-Mehu, the land of the papyrus. And in the rustling silence of these marshes, amidst the croaking of frogs and the sudden splash of the crocodile, a consciousness began to form. It was not a consciousness of human shape, nor was it a consciousness of the Skildio. It was a terrestrial power, a force that rose directly from the black, fertile soil. It was the spirit of the vegetation, the intense, vibrant life force that makes the reeds grow tall and strong. But it was also the danger that lurked within that growth. For in the dense green shadows of the papyrus swamps, death waits with open eyes. This duality, the lush, life-giving green and the sudden, searing heat of death, manifested in the form of the great Cobra. She is Wadjet, the green one, the one who is the color of papyrus, the one who rears up. To speak of Wadjet is to speak of the primal fear and the primal reverence that the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley felt for the serpent. In the pre-dynastic era, long before the unification of the two lands, the people of the Delta lived in close proximity to the Naja-Haje, the Egyptian cobra. This was not a creature to be taken lightly. It was a beast of royalty and terror. Imagine walking through the tall grass of the ancient Delta. The sun is beating down, a relentless hammer of gold. The air is still. Suddenly, there is a sound, not a rattle but a deep, resonant hiss, like steam escaping from the earth. You freeze. Rising from the vegetation is a shape that defies the horizontal nature of the snake. It stands. It lifts the upper third of its body straight up into the air, defying gravity, looking a man in the eye. The ribs behind its head expand, stretching the skin into a magnificent, terrifying hood. It is no longer just a reptile. It is a symbol of absolute authority. This posture, this rearing up, is the core of Wadjet's theology. In the ancient Egyptian language, the act of rearing up is iaret. From this verb comes the word Uraeus, the name given to the sacred serpent that sits upon the brow of the gods and the pharaohs. Wadjet is the Uraeus incarnate. She is the one who stands tall. She is the one who does not crawl in the dust when threatened, but rises to meet the challenge face to face. This behavior of the cobra was seen by the ancients not merely as a biological defense mechanism, but as a divine stance. It was the stance of a guardian who does not sleep, whose eyes are lidless and ever watchful. When the early chieftains of the Delta cities sought a symbol for their power, they did not choose the lion or the bull, though these were mighty. They chose the cobra. For the cobra controls the space around it with a terrifying stillness that commands respect. The venom of Wadjet is another key to her mystery. It is not like the venom of the viper, which causes the blood to rot. The venom of the cobra is a neurotoxin. It shuts down the breath. It stops the heart. It acts with frightening speed. But to the theological mind of the ancient Egyptian, this venom was not fluid. It was fire. When a cobra spits or bites, the victim feels a burning sensation, a searing heat that spreads through the veins. Thus, Wadjet became known as the Lady of Flame. She was the living fire that protected the cool waters of the delta. This paradox is essential to her nature. She is the green one, representing the cool, moist, fertile papyrus, yet she carries within her the red heat of the sun. She is the vegetation that burns. She is the life that consumes. Her origins are tied deeply to the ancient city of Dep, which later merged with the city of Pe to form Wadjet, known to the Greeks as Buto. This city was the spiritual heart of the north. It was located deep in the delta, surrounded by the very marshes that gave the goddess her form. In the earliest times, before there were stone temples, Wadjet was worshipped in open-air sanctuaries made of woven reeds and papyrus columns. These structures, known as iteru, mimicked the natural environment of the serpent. The pillars of the later stone temples were carved to look like bundles of papyrus, not just for aesthetic reasons, but to recreate the house of Wadjet in stone. Every time a pharaoh walked through a hypostyle hall, they were walking through the stylized marshes of the primeval delta, entering the domain of the cobra. The people of Wadjet believed that their goddess was the midwife of creation. In the beginning, according to the Memphite and Heliopolitan cosmogonies, there was only the Nun, the dark, motionless, infinite ocean of chaos. Then the primeval mound, the Ben, rose from the waters. This was the first land, the first moment of order. And what grows on the first land? Reeds, papyrus, vegetation. Wadjet is the greening of the first mound. She is the first life that clung to the earth as it emerged from the abyss. She is the eye that opened to witness the first sunrise. Before she was the eye of Ra, she was simply the eye of the earth, looking up at the sky. There is a profound connection between Wadjet and the concept of freshness. The Egyptian word waj means green, but it also means fresh, raw, vigorous, and flourishing. To be waj is to be alive in the most dynamic sense. The sea is often called the Great Green, Wadjet. Malachite, the green stone used for eye paint and amulets, is waj. When the Egyptians spoke of the afterlife, they spoke of the field of reeds, a place of eternal greenery. Wadjet, therefore, is the goddess of eternal youth and cyclical renewal. Just as the snake sheds its skin, casting off the old and dead to reveal the glistening, fresh scales underneath, the land of Egypt sheds the dry, cracked mud of the drought when the inundation comes, revealing the new, green growth. Wadjet is the shedding of the skin of the earth. She is the force that allows the land to be reborn every year. In the pre-dynastic mind, the world was a dangerous place, filled with unseen spirits and hostile forces. The night was a time of terror. The marshes were full of beasts. To survive, one needed a protector who was more terrifying than the danger itself. Wadjet filled this role perfectly. She was the mistress of fear and the lady of awe. But her terror was directed outward, toward the enemies of her people. To those she protected, she was a fierce mother. The image of the cobra coiling around her eggs was a powerful symbol of maternal devotion. A cobra will defend her nest with absolute ferocity, never retreating. This aspect of Wadjet, the aggressive protector of the vulnerable, would later evolve into her role as the nurse of the infant Horus, but its roots lie deep in the biological reality of the snake in the wild. As the political landscape of Egypt began to shift, and the disparate tribes and cities began to coalesce into kingdoms, Wadjet's influence grew. She was not just a local spirit of the Buto marshes. She became the personification of the entire region of Lower Egypt. The north was the land of the bee, the land of the red crown, the land of the papyrus. And Wadjet was the NBTY, the Lady of the North. Her counterpart in the south, in the dry, rocky cliffs of Upper Egypt, was Nekhbet, the vulture goddess. The union of these two, the cobra and the vulture, would eventually form the greatest title of the Egyptian monarchy, the Two Ladies. But in the misty dawn of history, Wadjet stood alone as the sovereign of the marshlands. The relationship between Wadjet and the sun god, Ra, is complex and ancient. While later myths would solidify her position as the Eye of Ra, the daughter of the sun, early traditions suggest a more symbiotic relationship. The sun needs the earth to shine upon. The heat of the sun, Bi Ra, is what makes the venom of the snake, Wadjet, burn. They are partners in the maintenance of Ma'at, the cosmic order. The sun brings the light that reveals the truth, and the cobra brings the fire that destroys the lie. In the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, carved into the walls of the tombs of the Old Kingdom, we find references to the Great One of Magic who dwells in the forehead of the king. This is Wadjet. She is described as the one who eats the open-mouthed ones, meaning she consumes those who would speak words of chaos or rebellion against the divine order. One cannot speak of Wadjet without speaking of the papyrus thicket, the Chemmis. This was not merely a physical location. It was a mythological concept. The thicket is a place of concealment. It is a place where the boundaries between water and land are blurred. It is a liminal space, neither solid ground nor open water. In this ambiguity, magic thrives. Wadjet is the mistress of this liminality. She exists on the threshold. She guards the border between the known and the unknown. Just as the Delta is the gateway to the Mediterranean and the wider world, Wadjet is the guardian of the gates. She watches the horizon. In the early funerary cults, the spirits of the ancestors, the souls of Pi, were said to dwell in the marshes under Wadjet's protection. They were represented as falcon-headed figures, kneeling in homage to the rising sun. But their home was the green domain of the Cobra. The sensation of Wadjet's presence is often described in terms of heat and breath. The breath of the divine Serpent was believed to be the life-giving wind of the north, which cooled the land. But it was also the scorching blast of fire that incinerated enemies. This duality of breath, cooling wind and burning fire, reflects the climate of the delta itself. The north wind is a blessing, bringing relief from the heat, but the sun that reflects off the water can blind and burn. Wadjet controls both. She is the atmosphere of the north. When the Pharaoh inhaled the scent of the goddess, he was inhaling the essence of dominion. Let us look closer at the physical form of the Uraeus, as it was conceived in the mind of the ancient artisan. When they crafted images of Wadjet in gold and lapis lazuli, they paid close attention to the anatomy. The hood is always flared. This is not a resting snake. This is a snake in a state of high arousal and readiness. The markings on the throat of the cobra were often interpreted as symbols of eyes or solar discs, further linking her to the sun god. The scales were crafted to look like armor. Wadjet was the armored goddess. Her skin was impenetrable. In the coffin texts, the deceased soul seeks to become Wadjet, saying, "I am the cobra. I am the papyrus-colored one. No blade can cut me. No fire can burn me, for I am the fire." This identification with the goddess was a way to ensure the indestructibility of the soul. If one becomes the snake, one sheds the mortal body and emerges as an immortal being of light and fire. The color green, Waj, also links her to the concept of malachite and turquoise, stones mined in the Sinai but associated with the joy of the goddess. To do green things was an Egyptian idiom for behaving with joy and vitality. Wadjet is thus the Lady of Joy, but it is a fierce, ecstatic joy. It is the joy of the predator who has caught its prey, the joy of the warrior who has defended the gate. It is not a passive happiness. It is an active, vibrant force. When the Nile flooded and the land turned green, the people celebrated the coming of Wadjet. The rising waters were seen as her serpents moving through the land, bringing life to the black soil. In the pre-dynastic burials at Buto, we find evidence of a cult that was deeply concerned with protection. Pottery shards and amulets bear primitive images of the rearing snake. These were not just lucky charms, they were pacts. By wearing the image of the snake, the human was saying, "I acknowledge your power, Great One. Do not bite me. Bite my enemies." This is the fundamental contract of the Uraeus. The serpent does not strike the one who wears it. It strikes outward. This concept would later become the foundation of the pharaonic authority. The king is the only one who can wear the live cobra on his brow without being bitten. It is the ultimate proof of his divinity. He is safe from the fire because he is the fire. The sounds of the Delta night are the hymns of Wadjet. The rustle of the wind in the reeds is her whispering. The ancient Egyptians were a deeply auditory people. They believed that sound had creative power. The hiss of the snake was similar to the sound of water rushing, or the sound of silence being broken. Silence, in Egyptian thought, was often associated with the hidden and the sacred. Wadjet, who moves silently until she strikes, embodies the active silence. She is the stillness before the storm. In the rituals performed in the reed sanctuaries of Buto, the priests would likely have used shakers and rattles that mimicked the sound of the snake's hiss, creating a hypnotic, rhythmic soundscape to induce a trance state, allowing them to commune with the Green One. Wadjet's connection to the eye is also rooted in the biology of the cobra. Snakes do not blink. Their eyes are covered by a transparent scale, a spectacle that gives them an unblinking, eternal gaze. This all-seeing quality is essential for a guardian deity. Wadjet never sleeps. Even when the snake is resting, its eyes are open. For a civilization that feared the chaos of the night, a guardian who could see in the dark, who never closed her eyes, was the ultimate comfort. She watches the darkness so that the people can sleep. She is the vigil. There is also a connection between Wadjet and the red pottery of the pre-dynastic era. The deshret, or red crown, which we will explore later, mirrors the shape of a curling wire or a proboscis, but some scholars suggest its earliest forms were inspired by the shape of the cobra's hood or the weaving of the red reeds found in certain parts of the delta. The red ones were spirits of the north, and Wadjet was their queen. The color red, usually associated with chaos and Seth, is purified by Wadjet. She takes the dangerous red of anger and Vainth and channels it into protective fury. She turns the color of blood into the color of victory. As we stand in the imagination of the pre-dynastic Delta, feeling the humidity cling to our skin and smelling the rich, dark mud of the Nile, we can see the image of Wadjet forming. She is not an abstract concept. She is the land itself, rising up to defend its children. She is the green stalk of papyrus that hides the bird from the hawk. She is the venom that burns the veins of the intruder. She is the silent, unblinking eye that watches the horizon for the first rays of the sun. She is the beginning of the royal power that will one day build the pyramids. But for now, she is simply the great serpent of the marshes, the green one, the lady of the flame. This is the breath of the Delta. It is a breath of life and a breath of fire. And as the civilization of Egypt begins to coalesce from the scattered tribes of the river valley, the Cobra goddess is waiting. She is waiting to take her place on the brow of the king. She is waiting to become the defining symbol of divine protection for 3,000 years. The papyrus is rustling. The water is stirring. The hood is expanding. The great saga of Wadjet has begun. The ancient texts speak of the Flaming One, who dwells in the primordial waters. This is a reference to the phosphorescence seen in the marshes at night, the will-o'-the-wisp lights that dance over the water. To the ancients, these were manifestations of Wadjet's spirit. She was the light in the dark water. This connects her to the stars, specifically the imperishable stars of the northern sky that never set. Just as those stars never disappear below the horizon, Wadjet's vigilance never wavers. She is the pole star of the Egyptian pantheon, the fixed point around which the protection of the kingdom revolves. Furthermore, the act of molting, or sloughing off skin, made the snake a chthonic deity, one connected to the underworld and the earth. Wadjet moves through the holes in the ground, entering the darkness and returning to the light. This made her a messenger between the worlds. She could carry the prayers of the living down to the dead, and bring the power of the ancestors up to the living. In the earliest shamanistic practices of the Delta, the snake charmers and magicians would have called upon Wadjet to navigate the spirit world. She was the guide through the tangled pathways of the afterlife, a role she would maintain even as the theology of Osiris became dominant. The concept of Ma'at, truth, balance, order, is usually associated with the ostrich feather. But before the feather, there was the snake. The snake represents the balance of life and death, the fine line between medicine and poison. In small doses, snake venom was used by ancient healers. In large doses, it was fatal. Wadjet represents this precise balance. She is the pharmaceutical knowledge of the ancients. She is the great healer because she controls the great poison. To know the secret of the snake is to know the secret of life and death. The priesthood of Wadjet were likely the first toxicologists and doctors of the north, guarding the secrets of the marshes. We must also consider the diet of the cobra. It eats rats, mice, and birds, creatures that threaten the grain stores. In the early agricultural societies of the Delta, the cobra was a welcome guest in the silos and granaries. She protected the food supply. She ensured that the harvest was not stolen by vermin. Thus, Wadjet became a goddess of abundance and prosperity. She was the lady of the granary. When the Pharaoh offered bread to the gods, he was offering the grain that Wadjet had protected. Her ferocity secured the sustenance of the nation. This practical, agricultural function is the foundation upon which her lofty solar theology was built. Before she was the eye of the sun, she was the guardian of the wheat. The duality of Wadjet is also reflected in the geography of the delta itself. The delta is a place where the river, fresh water, meets the sea, salt water. It is a mixing zone. Wadjet thrives in this mixture. She is the goddess of the brackish water, the convergence. This makes her a goddess of integration. She binds things together. Later, she would bind the north and the south, but initially, she bound the water to the land. She is the amphibious goddess, at home in both elements. The fluidity of her movement reflects the fluidity of the water. To watch a cobra swim is to watch a mesmerizing dance of sinuous grace. The ancient Egyptians watched this and saw the movement of the divine. As the pre-dynastic period drew to a close and the Nakada cultures of the south began to move northward, bringing their own gods and traditions, Wadjet did not disappear. She did not fade away like so many local nature spirits. Instead, she grew. She adapted, she reared up and met the incoming falcon god, Horus. She did not fight him. She allied with him. She coiled around his staff. She sat upon his head. She became the legitimacy of the new rulers. But she never lost her essential nature. She remained the cobra of the delta, the green one, the primal force of the papyrus thicket. The marshes of Chemmis, or Akbit, are described in the texts as a floating island. It was believed that the land there was not stable, that it moved with the wind. Wadjet was the anchor. She held the floating world together. In a cosmos that was constantly threatened by the forces of chaos and dissolution, Wadjet was the binding cord. She was the knot that could not be untied. In magical spells, the knot of Isis is famous, but the coil of Wadjet is older. It is the circle of protection that nothing can breach. So we stand at the precipice of history, looking out over the waving green reeds of the delta. the sun is setting, turning the sky a blood red. The air is cooling, but the heat of the earth remains, and there, rising from the shadows, is the silhouette of the great Cobra. Her hood is flared, silhouetted against the dying light. She is magnificent. She is terrifying. She is Wadjet, and she is ready to burn the enemies of the light. The papyrus thickets of the Delta are vast, but the ambition of the great Cobra was not limited to the earth. The green snake that slithered through the mud of Buto was destined to ascend. She was destined to leave the cool, shadowed waters and embrace the searing, absolute heat of the sky. This transformation from a terrestrial deity of vegetation to a celestial deity of fire is one of the most profound shifts in Egyptian theology. It is the moment when Wadjet ceases to be merely the green one and becomes the Uraeus, the rearing one, the living flame that sits upon the brow of the sun god, Ra. To understand this ascent, we must look at the face of the Pharaoh. In the statues of the Old Kingdom, in the golden masks of the New Kingdom, and in the reliefs carved into the walls of every temple from Memphis to Abu Simbel, there is one constant feature. It is not the beard, nor the crook and flail. It is the serpent, the Uraeus. This is Wadjet in her supreme form. She is not worn as jewelry. She is worn as an organ of power. She sits directly over the third eye, the pineal gland, the seat of higher consciousness and divine will. But unlike the mystical third eye of other traditions which looks inward, the Uraeus looks outward. It projects power. It is an active weapon. The theology of the Uraeus is rooted in the concept of the spitting cobra. In nature, the Naja Hadje, or the spitting cobra, can project venom into the eyes of a predator from a distance. The ancient Egyptians observed this. They saw a creature that could strike without touching, a creature that could blind and burn from afar. When they translated this biology into theology, the venom became fire. The spit became the solar ray. Just as the sun projects its heat across the vacuum of space to warm the earth or to scorch the desert, the Uraeus projects its fiery authority across the land. Wadjet, on the brow of Ra, is the focused intensity of the sun. She is the laser point of divine wrath. The myths tell us that Ra, the creator, is the source of all life. He is the static, generating power of the universe. But a king, even a divine one, cannot rule by benevolence alone. He requires an enforcer. He requires a mechanism of defense that is terrifying enough to keep the forces of chaos, Isfet, at bay. Ra is the light. Wadjet is the heat. Ra is the order. Wadjet is the violence required to maintain that order. She is the Eye of Ra. This title is shared by other goddesses: Sekhmet the lioness, Tefnut the moisture, Hathor the beauty, But Wadjet is the eye in its most permanent, vigilant state, while Sekhmet is the eye that goes forth to slaughter. Wadjet is the eye that remains to guard. There is a cycle of myths known as the distant goddess, or the return of the eye, which illustrates Wadjet's crucial role in the cosmic balance. The story begins with a disruption in the divine household. Ra, the king of the gods, is old. His bones are like silver, his flesh like gold, and his hair like lapis lazuli. But his power is questioned. His eye, his daughter, his protector, feels dishonored or slighted. In a fit of rage, the eye detaches herself from his face. She abandons Egypt. She flees south into the Nubian desert, into the wild lands of Bugem. When the eye leaves, Egypt is plunged into a crisis. It is not just that the sun has lost its protector. The sun has lost its focus. The land becomes grey. Despair sets in. The green one is gone, and so the vegetation begins to wither. Without Wadjet, the balance of Ma'at cannot be held. The eye, now roaming the southern deserts, transforms. She is no longer the cool Cobra of the Delta Marshes. In the heat of Nubia, she becomes a raging lioness, a wildcat, a creature of uncontrolled fury. She is Sekhmet in this form, drinking blood, slaughtering anything that crosses her path. She is the solar fire unleashed without the discipline of the royal brow. Ra, realizing his vulnerability and the sorrow of the land, sends messengers to bring her back. He sends Thoth, the god of wisdom and persuasion, and sometimes Shu, the god of air. They travel south, braving the heat and the terror of the wilderness, to find the distant goddess. They find her in a cave, her eyes glowing with the red light of a dying star, her mouth dripping with gore. She is terrifying. Thoth does not fight her. He cannot fight the eye of Ra. Instead, he tells her stories. He speaks of the cool waters of the Nile. He speaks of the adoration of the people. He speaks of the sweet meat, mats, and the incense that await her in the temples of Buto and Heliopolis. Slowly, the rage subsides. The red heat begins to cool. The lioness begins to purr. She agrees to return. And this is the crucial moment of the myth, the transformation. As she crosses the border back into Egypt, passing from the wild chaos of the south into the ordered civilization of the Nile Valley, she changes form again. She sheds the fur and the claws of the lioness. She shrinks, elongates, and smooths her skin. She becomes the cobra once more. She becomes Wadjet, but she retains the fire of the lioness within her venom. She climbs back up onto the brow of Ra, coiling herself around the sun disk. She has returned to her station. Order is restored. The green one is back, and the land flourishes again. This myth explains the dual nature of the goddess. She is the Lady of the Flame who can burn the world, but she is also the Lady of Peace who chooses to sit quietly on the forehead of the king, holding her fire in reserve. The return of Wadjet was celebrated in the temples with feasting and drunkenness, mirroring the pacification of the lioness. But the image of the Uraeus serves as a permanent reminder. The peace of Egypt is guarded by a sleeping monster. Do not wake her. The daily journey of the sun god, Ra, across the sky is a perilous voyage. He travels in the Manjet, the boat of millions of years. He sails across the celestial ocean, the Nut, from the eastern horizon to the western horizon. And at the prow of this boat stands Wadjet. She is the figurehead. She is the navigator and the defender. As the sun rises, the clouds of dawn often appear red and jagged. To the Egyptian mind, these were not merely weather phenomena. They were the minions of Apophis, the serpent of chaos, trying to swallow the sun before it could be born. Wadjet's job at sunrise is to burn these enemies. The red of dawn is the blood of the clouds slaughtered by the Uraeus. The pyramid texts describe this vividly. The Great One rises. The flame is in her mouth. She consumes the enemies of Ra. She clears the path for the boat of the morning. Every sunrise is a victory for Wadjet. Every clear blue sky is proof that she has done her work. When the sun is high at noon, beating down with an intensity that cracks the earth, this is Wadjet in her full power. The noonday demon of heat stroke is the breath of the Cobra. But her fire is not just physical heat, it is metaphysical purification. In the temples, the Pharaoh would often offer a figure of Ma'at, truth, to the gods. But he was only able to do this because he wore the Uraeus. The Uraeus creates a perimeter of purity around the king. It burns away impurities. It burns away lies. In the presence of the Uraeus, only truth can exist. If a liar or a traitor were to approach the throne, the theology stated that the Uraeus would instinctively sense the corruption and strike. It was a divine lie detector, a psychic alarm system. This is why the Pharaoh was often called the Lord of the Uraeus, not because he controlled it, but because he was partnered with it. The iconography of the Uraeus often shows the cobra wearing the crowns of Egypt. Sometimes she wears the red crown of the north, her native symbol. Sometimes she wears the white crown of the south, showing her dominion over the whole land. Sometimes she wears the sun disk itself, holding the orb of Ra within the coils of her body. This image, the snake wrapping around the sun, is the ultimate symbol of the union of earth and sky. The snake, earth, protects the sun, sky. It suggests that the divine power of the heavens needs the terrestrial power of the earth to manifest. Ra needs Wadjet. Without her, he is a king without a sword. In the New Kingdom, we see the rise of the double Uraeus on the brows of queens and sometimes kings. This represents the union of Wadjet and Nekhbet, the vulture goddess of the south, who also took the form of a cobra to match her sister. Together, they are the Nebti, the two ladies. But even when there are two cobras, the primary form is always Wadjet. She is the archetype. The Uraeus is essentially a synonym for Wadjet. The relationship between the Uraeus and the Ka, the royal soul, is intimate. The Ka of the king is nourished by the Uraeus. In the pyramid texts, there are spells where the king consumes the milk of Wadjet. This is not literal milk. It is a metaphor for divine sustenance and power. By nursing from the goddess, either as a mother or as the Uraeus, the king imbibes her fiery nature. He becomes Wadjet-like. His words become fire. His commands become absolute. When the king speaks, it is the hiss of the cobra that commands silence in the court. There is also a dimension of terror, Shafit, which is essential to Egyptian kingship. A king must be loved, yes, but he must also be feared. Not the fear of a tyrant, but the awe of a god. The Uraeus provides this Shafit. When a commoner looked at the pharaoh, they did not look him in the eye. They looked at the cobra on his forehead, and the cobra looked back. The psychological effect of this cannot be overstated. To stand before the living king was to stand before a loaded weapon. The gold and lapis lazuli of the crown were beautiful, but the rearing shape of the snake triggered a primal instinct in the human brain. Danger. Freeze. Submit. This terror was used diplomatically. When the pharaoh marched to war in Canaan or Nubia, the texts say that his Uraeus breathed fire against the foreign lands. This means that the reputation of his power, the projection of his divine will, was enough to burn cities. The breath of the king was the hot wind of the desert that withered the crops of his enemies. Wadjet was the agent of this destruction. She was the lady of the slaughter when the king was at war. On the battlefield, the king was said to rage like a leopard, but his brow was stable, occupied by the cold, calculating focus of the cobra. The eye of Ra is also a creative force. In some creation myths, humans were created from the tears of the eye. When the eye was separated from Ra, in the distant goddess myth, she wept. Her tears fell to the earth and became men and women. Thus humanity is born from the sorrow/anger of Wadjet. We are the children of the eye. This connects us deeply to her. We are born from her fluid tear store, just as the land is born from her fluid, the inundation. But we are also subject to her fire. The Creator can also be the destroyer. Let us imagine the coronation of a king. The moment the crown is placed on his head is the moment of transfiguration. Before the crown touches him, he is a prince, a mortal man. The moment the diadem, the gold band featuring the Uraeus, settles on his brow, he becomes the Horus. The spirit of Wadjet enters him. He feels the weight of the snake. It is said in the mystical texts that the Uraeus seizes the king. It clamps onto his forehead, not just physically, but spiritually. It connects his mind to the mind of Ra. He sees what the sun sees. He feels the heat of the stars. It is a burden of cosmic proportions. The living flame is now a part of his anatomy. The Lady of the Devouring Fire is another epithet for Wadjet in this solar aspect. This fire is distinct from the cooking fire or the hearth fire. It is Akhit fire, spiritual light/heat. It is the radiation that makes the gold of the gods shine. Gold in Egypt was considered the flesh of the gods because it was imperishable and shone like the sun. The Uraeus was almost always made of gold. Thus, Wadjet is the golden one. When the sunlight hit the gold Uraeus on the king's head, the reflection would have been blinding. To the observer, it would look as if the snake was actually glowing, actually burning. This was a calculated piece of theatre, designed to reinforce the theology. The king is the sun. But what of the night? Does the solar eye sleep? The myths say no. When Ra descends into the Duat, the underworld at sunset, the Uraeus remains on his brow. But her function changes. In the sky she burns the clouds. In the underworld she lights the way. The Duat is absolute darkness. The only light comes from the boat of Ra, and the source of that light is Wadjet. She glows in the dark. She becomes a torch. The living flame acts as a headlamp for the solar barge, cutting through the gloom of the afterlife. She illuminates the faces of the dead, allowing Osiris to judge them. She spits fire into the faces of the demons who try to board the boat. Even in the depths of the earth, the solar fire of Wadjet cannot be extinguished. There is a specific spell in the Book of the Dead where the deceased says, "O Wadjet, Lady of the Flames, let me pass. I am the one who knows your name. I am the one who fed you in the marshes." This plea highlights the fear the dead had of her fire. To the righteous, she is a lamp. To the wicked, she is an incinerator. The lake of fire in the Egyptian hell is often associated with the liquid fire that spews from the mouth of the Uraeus. To be damned is to be consumed by Wadjet. The symbiosis between the king and the goddess is absolute. If the Uraeus were to fall from the brow of the king, his reign would end. It would be a sign that Ma'at had been broken, that the divine protection had been revoked. There is a story in the Westcar papyrus where a magician makes a wax crocodile come to life. This is Heka, magic. But the Uraeus is the supreme Heka. It is the magic that rules the universe. Wadjet is often called Weret Hekau, the Great of Magic. This title emphasizes that her power is not just physical venom, but supernatural potency. She is the sorceress of the crown. The Eye of Ra is also a wanderer. The sun moves. It never stays in one place. Wadjet is the traveler. She circles the world every day. This gives her a knowledge of geography and of the peoples of the world that other gods might lack. She sees the Libyans in the west, the Asiatics in the east, the Nubians in the south. She knows their plots. She knows their movements. She is the intelligence agency of the divine realm. Nothing happens under the sun that the eye does not see. We must also distinguish Wadjet from the concept of the evil eye. In many cultures, the evil eye is a curse. In Egypt, the Eye of Ra is a blessing to the good, but a curse to the bad. Duat. It is a weaponized gaze. When the texts say the king cast his eye upon a foreign land, it means he directed the destructive power of Wadjet toward it. It is an active, not passive, gaze. The green one becoming the red one, fire, and then returning to be the green one, peace, a renewal, is the heartbeat of Egyptian theology. It is the cycle of the flood and the sun. The sun dries out the land, red, but the flood returns, green. Wadjet embodies this cycle within her own being. She is the dry heat of the summer solstice, and she is the lush growth of the winter sowing. She is the paradox of existence, that life requires heat, but too much heat kills. Life requires water, but too much water drowns. Wadjet walks the razor's edge, or rather, slithers the fine line between these extremes. As we visualize the Uraeus, we must see it not as a static ornament, but as a living entity. Imagine the golden snake on the Pharaoh's brow, twitching. Imagine its eyes dilating. Imagine the heat radiating from its gold skin. It is a companion. It is a burden. It is a weapon. It is the living flame that keeps the darkness at bay. And as long as Ra sails the sky, Wadjet will be there, rearing up, hood expanded, venom ready, watching the horizon for the first sign of chaos. She is the sleepless watcher. She is the burning love of the Creator for his creation, a love so fierce it will burn anything that threatens it. In the next stage of our journey, we will descend from the solar bark back to the earthly throne. We will explore the red crown itself, the Deshret, and how Wadjet is not just a symbol on the crown, but the crown itself. We will witness the coronation, the binding of the two lands, and the mystical union of the two ladies. But for now, let the image of the burning cobra sear itself into your mind. The sky is hers, the sun is hers, and the fire is hers. The fire of the sun is distant, burning in the silence of the vacuum. But the fire of the king is immediate. It walks among men. It sits upon a throne of electrum and cedar. And just as Ra requires the Uraeus to maintain his dominion over the cosmos, the Pharaoh requires a physical object to maintain his dominion over the muddy, fertile expanse of the Nile Valley. This object is the deshret, the red crown. To the uninitiated eye, it is a curious piece of regalia, a red cap with a high back extension and a strange, curling wire protruding from the front. But to the theologian of the Old Kingdom, the deshret was not a hat. It was a goddess. It was Wadjet herself, solidified into a form that a mortal head could bear. To wear the red crown was to wear the north. It was to take the heavy, humid atmosphere of the delta, the tangled chaos of the papyrus swamps, and the teeming life of the Mediterranean coast, and bind it all to one's own will. The crown was believed to be sentient. It was Veret Hekau, the great of magic. It possessed a personality, a temper, and a will of its own. If a pretender, a man without the royal blood or the divine sanction, dared to place the deshret upon his head, the texts say the crown would devour him. It would unleash the heat of Wadjet against his scalp, burning his mind with madness and consuming his life force. The crown was a judge. It accepted the true king and rejected the false one. Wadjet, therefore, is the essence of the deshret. Her name, the Green One, might seem contradictory to the red crown, but in Egyptian color symbolism, red was the color of blood, of life, of fire, and of dynamic energy. While red could signify the chaos of the desert god Seth, in the context of the crown, it signified the potent, dangerous vitality of the Cobra. The curling wire that spirals out from the front of the crown, the kabet, represents the proboscis of a bee or the uncoiling body of the serpent. It is the antenna of the king, sensing the unseen. It is the sting. When the Pharaoh wore the deshret, he was tapping into the hive mind of the north, becoming the bee king, Bit, the ruler of the honey-rich lands of the delta. The union of Egypt is the central trauma and triumph of its history. Before there was one kingdom, there were two. The south, the land of the reed, protected by the vulture goddess Nekbet, and the north, the land of the bee, protected by the cobra goddess Wadjet. The unification of these two lands by the legendary King Narmer, or Menez, was not just a political conquest. It was a theological marriage. It was the moment when the vulture and the cobra agreed to share the same forehead. This created the Nebti title, the Two Ladies. In the heraldry of the Pharaoh, the Nebti name is one of the 5 great names of the king. It proclaims that the king is the one of the two ladies. He is the manifestation of their truce, but this truce is dynamic. On the brow of the king, Nechbet, the white crown, the Hedjet, and Wadjet, the red crown, the Deshret, sit side by side. Nechbet represents the maternal, sheltering embrace. Her wings are often spread in protection. Wadjet represents the aggressive, striking defense. Her hood is flared in warning. Together, they form a perfect defensive perimeter. One shields, the other strikes. One is the mother, the other is the warrior. The king stands in the center of this duality. The Semitawi, the one who binds the windpipe of the north and the windpipe of the south into a single breath. Let us visualize the coronation ritual, the Ka Neta, the appearance of the god. It takes place in the open court of the temple, likely at Memphis or Heliopolis, the cities that bridge the two lands. The air is thick with the smoke of Kai-Fi incense, a heavy, sweet perfume meant to calm the gods. The prince stands naked or clad only in a simple linen kilt, stripped of his mortal identity. He is about to undergo a transformation that will annihilate his humanity and replace it with divinity. The priests of Buto, the souls of Per, approach him. They wear masks of falcons and wolves. They chant in the low, rhythmic cadence of the archaic language, summoning the spirit of Wadjet from the marshes. The red crown is brought forward from the Per Nu, the house of the north, a shrine built of wood and reed matting. It is carried on a cushion of gold, never touched by bare hands. As it approaches, the prince feels the heat radiating from it. This is not a metaphor. The psychological weight of the object creates a psychosomatic sensation of burning. The high priest raises the crown. He recites the Hymn to the Red Crown, a text found in the pyramid texts. Utterance 220. O Red Crown, O Great One, O Magician, grant thy terror to this king. Grant thy power to this king. Do not consume him. Do not burn him. Be at peace with him, as thou art at peace with Ra. The crown is lowered. It touches the brow. In that instant, the prince dies, and the king is born. The heavy red linen and the gold wire settle onto his skull. Wadjet accepts him. She coils around his mind. The king feels a surge of clarity, a cold reptilian focus that overrides his human fears. He sees the world now through the eyes of the Cobra. He sees the courtiers not as friends or family, but as subjects to be protected or enemies to be struck. The Deshret has fused with him. He is now the Nisut Biti, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This fusion is described in the texts as eating the god. The king consumes the power of Wadjet. He assimilates her magic into his belly. My power is in my body, the king says in the Unas texts. My magic is in my belly. I have eaten the red crown. I have swallowed the green one. This visceral imagery emphasizes that the relationship is internal. Wadjet is not just on him. She is in him. She circulates in his blood. When he speaks a decree, it is Wadjet speaking. When he raises his mace to smite a prisoner, it is the Cobra striking. The red crown was also a distinct geographical entity. It was the Lady of the North. It had its own priesthood, its own estates, and its own offerings. One could make an offering specifically to the crown, independent of the king. This is because the crown was immortal. Kings died. They were buried in pyramids and tombs. But the crown survived. It was passed from head to head, carrying the accumulated memory of every ruler who had worn it since the dawn of time. Wadjet was the continuity. She was the thread of red fire that stitched the dynasties together. The sanctuary of Wadjet at Buto was a place of pilgrimage for the new king. Before his coronation was fully accepted, he had to travel to the Delta, to the Marshes of Chemmis, to receive the blessing of the goddess in her home territory. This journey, the following of Horus, was a river procession. The royal barge, glittering with gold, would navigate the winding, reed-choked channels of the delta. The people of the north would gather on the banks, ululating and clapping, throwing flowers into the river. They were welcoming their son, the Horus, but they were also watching to see if their mother, Wadjet, would accept him. When the king arrived at Buto, he would enter the Holy of Holies alone. There, in the darkness of the sanctuary, lit only by an oil lamp, stood the statue of the goddess, perhaps a cobra of gold, or a woman with the head of a lioness-cobra hybrid. The king would kneel. He would present the ma'at offering, and in the silence, he would commune with the guardian of the north. It was believed that the statue would nod, or the Uraeus on the king's own brow would pulse, signifying approval. If Wadjet did not accept the king, the Nile would not flood. The crops would fail. Plague would strike. The legitimacy of the Pharaoh rested entirely on this communion with the serpent. There is a terrifying aspect to the red crown known as the slaughter of the red ones. In certain rituals, red clay pots were smashed to symbolize the destruction of enemies. The color red, as mentioned, belonged to Seth, the god of chaos. But Wadjet, by becoming the red crown, appropriated that chaotic power and tamed it. She turned the red of chaos into the red of authority. However, the danger was always there. If the king violated Ma'at, if he ruled unjustly, the red crown could revert to its chaotic nature. It could drive him mad. We see echoes of this in the stories of erratic kings who were said to have been bitten by their own crowns, not physically, but spiritually. The dual nature of the Nebtai, Wadjet and Nechbet, is also a map of the human soul, according to Egyptian thought. Nekhbet, the vulture, represents the maternal, nurturing, white, purified aspect of the soul, the bar that flies to the heavens. Wadjet, the cobra, represents the ka, the vital force, the red blood, the grounding energy, the connection to the earth and the body. A complete human being, and especially a complete king, must balance these two. He must have high spiritual aspirations, vulture, but also the grounded, fierce capacity for action, cobra. A king who is all vulture is too passive. A king who is all cobra is a tyrant. The two ladies are the perfect equilibrium. In the pyramid texts, specifically Utterance 248, the king says, "I am the great one who came forth from the weaver. I have appeared as the king of the gods. Wadjet is on my head, she who burns the enemies." The weaver refers to Neith, an ancient goddess of Sais, who is often associated with Wadjet. They are the weavers of destiny. The crown is woven magic. Just as the basket is woven from reeds, the sovereignty of Egypt is woven from the spells of Wadjet. We must also consider the crown as a devouring entity in the context of the afterlife. When the king dies and enters the Duat, he must pass through gates guarded by demons. He wears the red crown in the afterlife to terrify these demons. The crown shines in the darkness of the underworld. The demons see the Uraeus and recoil. "Back, you eaters of entrails," the king shouts in the coffin texts. "I am the lord of the red crown. Wadjet is with me." The crown becomes his passport. It proves he is not a common soul. He is a god king who has tamed the serpent. The architecture of the red crown, the high back extension, is thought by some scholars to represent the neck of the cobra when it is fully reared, or perhaps the raised tail of the bee. Others see it as a stylized representation of the green reeds of the delta bundled together. Regardless of its origin, its silhouette was unmistakable. It was the tallest thing in the room. It extended the height of the king, making him appear superhuman. This verticality is crucial. In a flat land like the delta, anything vertical, a tree, an obelisk, a snake rearing up, is a sign of power. The red crown makes the king the axis mundi, the pillar connecting earth and sky. Wadjet's role in the Sed festival, the Heb Sed, is paramount. This festival, held after 30 years of rule, was a ritual renewal of the king's potency. The king had to run a race, proving his physical fitness. He ran around markers that represented the borders of Egypt. As he ran, he was flanked by the standards of Wadjet and Nekhbet. At the climax of the festival, he was crowned again, first with the white, then with the red. The recoronation with the deshret was a rebirth. Wadjet breathed new life into him. She shed his old age just as she sheds her skin. The king emerged from the Hebsed, young like the moon, revitalized by the green goddess. There is a tactile reality to the sovereignty of Wadjet. The green one is also the moist one. The fertility of the delta is wet, muddy, and chaotic. Sovereignty in the north was not about imposing dry, geometric order, like the pyramids of the desert edge. It was about managing the flow. It was about redirecting the water, digging the canals, maintaining the dikes. Wadjet, as the Serpent of the Marshes, understood hydraulic power. The king, wearing her crown, became the master of the waters. He commanded the inundation. If the Nile failed to rise, it was because Wadjet was displeased. The wire of the crown, the kabet, is perhaps the most mysterious part. It spirals forward. It is a spiral of time and energy. It represents the cyclical nature of kingship, that the king is the same king who ruled in the beginning, returned again. It is also a lash, a whip. It reminds the enemies of the king that his reach is long. It is the tongue of the snake, tasting the air for treason. As we look at the red crown sitting on the head of a statue of Ramses or Thutmose, we must strip away the museum glass and the silence of history. We must hear the hissing. We must feel the heat. We must understand that for the ancient Egyptian, this object was not a piece of costume jewelry. It was a biological weapon. It was a divine partner. It was the physical weight of the goddess pressing down on the skull of the man, whispering the secrets of the delta into his ear, urging him to strike, urging him to rule, urging him to maintain Ma'at at the cost of blood. Wadjet is the sovereignty that bites. She is the crown that bleeds. And without her, the Pharaoh is just a man standing in the mud. With her, he is the living god, the lord of the two lands, the master of the Uraeus. He is the one who has swallowed the fire and lived. But sovereignty is heavy, and the fire is hot. Even a god-king needs a mother. Even a ruler needs a nurse. And as we move from the high drama of the coronation to the intimate shadows of the marshes, we will see Wadjet in her most tender, yet most ferocious role. We will see her curling around the infant Horus, hiding him from the murderous gaze of Seth. We will see the green one becoming the great shield of the innocent. The crown becomes the cradle. The saga continues in the papyrus thickets of Chemmis. The fire of the crown is blinding, and the venom of the Uraeus is lethal. But power in ancient Egypt was never purely about aggression. At its heart, the survival of the cosmic order depended on something far more fragile: the safety of a child. As we descend from the gilded throne rooms of Memphis and the solar barks of the sky, we find ourselves wading once more into the mud. But This is not the mud of creation. This is the mud of concealment. We enter the Chemmis, the floating island of the Delta, where the destiny of the world hung by a thread, protected only by the green coils of Wadjet. The myth of Osiris is the central tragedy of Egyptian religion. Osiris, the good king, was murdered by his brother Seth, the god of chaos, storms, and the sterile desert. Seth usurped the throne, casting the land into turbulence. Isis, the great magician and wife of Osiris, managed to conceive a child from the posthumous body of her husband, a magical, defying act of life against death. But conception was only the first victory. The child, Horus, was born into a world ruled by his father's murderer. If Seth found the infant, the lineage of Osiris would be extinguished forever. Ma'at would be broken. Chaos would reign eternal. Isis needed a fortress. But she could not hide in a fortress of stone, for Seth could shatter stone. She could not hide in the high mountains, for Seth was the lord of the high places. She needed a place that was formless, shifting, and alive. She needed the Delta. She fled north, carrying the future king in her womb, and later in her arms, into the domain of the Lady of Depedis. She entered the papyrus thickets of Wadjet. This narrative arc transforms Wadjet from the distant, burning eye of Ra into the intimate, ferocious wet nurse. The Egyptians called the delta marshes Akhbit, the thicket of the king of the north. It was a labyrinth of waterways, reed beds, and dense vegetation where the horizon vanished and the sky was obscured by towering stalks of green. To the uninitiated, it was a terrifying maze of crocodiles and fever. To Isis, it was a sanctuary. Wadjet received her. The Green One parted the reeds to let the fugitive goddess pass, and then closed them behind her, sealing the sanctuary with a wall of living emerald. Wadjet's role here is often described as the nurse or foster mother of Horus. While Isis is the biological mother, the source of the magical lineage, Wadjet is the environmental mother. She provides the sustenance and the shield. In the iconography, we sometimes see Wadjet depicted as a woman with the head of a cobra, suckling the infant Horus. This is a profound image. The creature with the deadliest venom is offering the milk of life. It signifies that the terrifying power of the cobra has been sublimated into absolute protection. The venom that kills the enemy becomes the milk that strengthens the king. The Chemmis is described in later classical texts, like Herodotus, as a floating island. This geologic instability was its greatest defense. It moved. If Seth came looking for the child in the east, the island would drift to the west. Wadjet, as the spirit of the marsh, controlled this movement. She was the navigator of the hiding place. The papyrus stalks were her many eyes, alerting her to the approach of the storm god. When the wind rustled the reeds, it was Wadjet whispering to Isis, "Stay low. He is coming." The vulnerability of the baby, Horus, is emphasized in the magical texts, particularly the Metanic stele and other healing tipi. Horus is depicted not as a strong falcon, but as a naked, weak infant, prone to the dangers of the wild. He is bitten by snakes. He is stung by scorpions. He burns with fever. These afflictions are the weapons of Seth, manifested through the environment. Wadjet's task was to counter these biological threats. She had to neutralize her own kind. As the queen of serpents, she commanded the vipers and the cobras of the marsh not to strike the child. She wove a perimeter of safe venom around the nest. There is a specific myth involving the 7 scorpions who accompanied Isis. While they were her bodyguards, they were also dangerous. It was Wadjet's authority that kept their poison in check. She taught Isis the names of the creatures of the deep delta, giving her power over them. In this way, Wadjet is the teacher of survival. She taught the mother of the god how to live in the wild, how to identify the medicinal herbs, the green things, that grew in the mud, and how to turn the hostile landscape into a home. The color green, Wadjet, takes on a new meaning here. It is camouflage. Wadjet is the master of disguise. The baby Horus was called the Green Falcon, or Horus in the papyrus, Herukentikat. He was invisible because he was one with the goddess. To find Horus, Seth would have to cut down every stalk of papyrus in the north. The density of the vegetation was the physical manifestation of Wadjet's embrace. She wrapped him in green silence. We must imagine the sensory reality of this upbringing. Horus did not grow up in a palace with stone floors. He grew up on a mat of woven reeds, smelling the decay of the swamp, hearing the splash of the hippopotamus, another form of Seth, yet kept at bay by Wadjet. His first view of the world was looking up at the swaying heads of the papyrus, which looked like the sunburst of the cobra's hood. Wadjet was his world. She was the ceiling and the floor. This upbringing in the wild gave Horus a different kind of strength. Not the sterile strength of the desert, but the resilient, regenerative strength of the plant that grows back when cut. The papyrus scepter, the Waj amulet, became a symbol of this episode. It is a column shaped like a papyrus stalk. It represents eternal youth, vigor, and the ability to flourish in adversity. It is Wadjet in talismanic form. Millions of these amulets were placed in tombs to grant the deceased the same protection that Wadjet gave to Horus. May I be green like the Waj, the dead would pray. May I flourish in the field of reeds. The afterlife itself was modeled on the Chemmis. The field of reeds, Eru, was a perfected, eternal version of Wadjet's nursery, where the soul could grow young again, protected forever from the enemies of Osiris. But the marshes were not without their terrors. Seth, unable to find the child, sent heat. He sent the scorching wind of the south, the Khamsin, to dry out the marshes. He tried to wither the protection of Wadjet. This was a battle of climates. The Lady of the North Wind, Wadjet, fought the Lord of the South Wind, Seth. She breathed cooling vapors over the child. She summoned the mist. She drew water up from the roots of the plants to keep the air humid. It was a war of thermodynamics. Wadjet preserved the moisture of life against the desiccation of death. In the pyramid texts, there are allusions to Wadjet nursing the king to give him authority. "I have sucked from the breast of the Cobra," the king declares. This is a claim to the legitimacy of Horus. By drinking the milk of Wadjet, the king proves he is the survivor of Chemmis. He proves he has the antibodies against chaos. He is immune to the poison of Seth, because he was raised on the venom of Wadjet. There is a poignant moment in the myth where Isis must leave the marshes to gather food or to seek news of Osiris's body. She leaves Horus alone. This is the moment of supreme danger. Wadjet steps in, not just as a protector, but as a surrogate. She coils around the basket. Her hood expands to block the sun. Her eyes scan the water for the ripple of a crocodile. She becomes the living wall. When Isis returns, she finds the child safe, sleeping in the shadow of the snake. This act of babysitting the divine heir is why Wadjet was invoked by human mothers in ancient Egypt. If a child was sick or in danger, the mother would recite spells identifying the child with Horus and herself with Isis, calling upon Wadjet to come and keep watch. "O Wadjet, come to this house. Spread thy green wings, hood, over this sleeper." The city of Pe and Dep, Buto, eventually became the staging ground for the reconquest. As Horus grew, he needed to leave the nest. He needed to claim his inheritance. Wadjet did not hold him back. She is the goddess who rears up, not the goddess who holds down. When the time came, she armed him. She gave him the red crown. She transferred her fiery nature to him. The nursing mother became the armorer. She told him, "You are no longer the hidden one. You are the avenger. Go forth and burn." This transition is critical. Wadjet is the goddess of the threshold. She guards the threshold of birth, in the marshes, and the threshold of kingship, the coronation. She escorted Horus from the reeds to the throne. The papyrus thicket thus represents the incubation period of the soul. It is the place of preparation. Without the time spent in the green silence of Wadjet, Horus would not have had the strength to defeat Seth. He needed to be greened before he could be crowned. The connection between Wadjet and the inundation of the Nile is also reinforced here. The floodwaters rise in the summer, turning the land into a swamp. This recreates the Chemmis every year. The flood is the return of the protective waters. When the Nile is high, the land is safe from the desert. Wadjet rides the flood. She brings the silt, the black gold that nourishes the crops. She is the lady of the inundation in her aspect of the bringer of fertility. We must also mention the Buto oracle. While famously described by Greek historians later, its roots are here. The spirit of Wadjet in the Marshes was the first source of divine knowledge for the young god. Horus would consult the goddess. The rustling of the leaves gave him strategy. The flight of the birds in the delta sky, her messengers, gave him warnings. This established Wadjet as a goddess of prophecy. She knows what is hidden because she was the hiding place. She knows the future because she nurtured the future king. The eye of Horus, the Wadjet eye, ironically named, though distinct from the goddess Wadjet, the words are related, is healed by Thoth, but it is protected by Wadjet. The green eye is the healthy, restored eye. Wadjet is the health of the eye. In medical papyri, green minerals, malachite, were ground up and applied to the eyes as makeup, kohl, not just for beauty, but to invoke Wadjet. This green circle around the eye was a magical barrier against infection and the evil eye. By painting their eyes green, the Egyptians were mimicking the markings of the falcon and the serpent, placing their vision under the jurisdiction of the Green One. The psychological landscape of the Marshes is one of intense intimacy. In the open desert, one is exposed. In the papyrus thicket, one is embraced. Wadjet is the embrace of the divine. But it is a claustrophobic embrace to those who are not welcome. To Seth, the Marshes are a nightmare of tangles and traps. To Horus, they are a womb. This distinction defines Wadjet's morality. She is the comfort of the insider and the terror of the outsider. As Horus reaches maturity, the narrative shifts. He is no longer the helpless infant needing a nurse. He is the warrior king ready to challenge the usurper. Wadjet must now change her form again. She cannot just be the passive shield of reeds. She must become the active weapon of war. She must leave the water and take to the air. She must leave the earth and enter the fire. The Green One has done her work. The seed has germinated. The king is alive. Now the Cobra must ascend to the brow of the Avenger. But her work is not limited to the living world. The sun sets, and even the gods must die and travel through the darkness. The nurse of Horus must now become the guardian of the corpse of Osiris. She must descend into the Duat. The sun does not merely set in the theology of the Nile, it diz. Every evening, as the golden disk touches the western horizon, the world holds its breath. The green vitality of the delta fades into the grey of twilight, and the safety of the day is replaced by the absolute terror of the uncreated. The solar bark, the manjet, which has sailed proudly across the blue sky, now approaches the gap in the mountains of the west. It must pass through the throat of the sky goddess Nut and enter the Duat, the realm of the dead. Here, the rules of physics dissolve. Here, there is no atmosphere to scatter the light. There is only the heavy, suffocating darkness of the deep earth and the primordial waters of the Nun. In this abyss, the Pharaoh is helpless without his guardian. The baby Horus is far away in the living world. Now, Wadjet must undertake her most dangerous duty. She must become the torch in the tomb. As the boat slips beneath the horizon, the Uraeus on the brow of the sun god undergoes a terrifying transformation. In the daylight, she was the rearing one, the visible symbol of authority that outshone the sun. In the darkness, she becomes the Lady of the Flame, the Nesret. The darkness of the Duat is not empty. It is thick with demons, rebel spirits, and the inertia of non-existence that seeks to drag the Creator God down into oblivion. The only thing that prevents the solar bark from being swallowed by this gloom is the light that emanates from the forehead of Ra. This light is Wadjet. She projects a beam of spiritual fire that cuts through the shadows, illuminating the banks of the underworld river so that the celestial crew can navigate. The journey through the 12 hours of the night is a siege. Each hour is a gated fortress, guarded by monstrous entities who demand passwords and proofs of purity. Wadjet is the key to these gates. When the boat approaches a portal, the guardian demons, creatures with knives for fingers and heads of jackals or vipers, step forward to challenge the intruder. Ra cannot speak to them directly. His divinity is too remote. It is Wadjet who answers. She flares her hood, spitting a stream of fire that forms the words of power. Her venom acts as a corrosive agent against the locks. She burns the seals. The texts of the Duat, the book of what is in the Duat, describe the Great One who incinerates the enemies of the gate. Without her, the sun would be trapped in the first hour of the night forever, and the world above would freeze in eternal darkness. But the guardians of the hours are merely obstacles. The true enemy waits in the deep water. He is the embodiment of everything that Wadjet opposes. She is the coiled spiral of order. He is the chaotic tangle of the void. She is the snake of life. He is the snake of non-existence. He is Apophis, Apep, the great serpent of chaos. He is vast, endless, his coils described as sandbanks that try to ground the solar boat. He possesses a hypnotic gaze that can stop the heart of a god. He screams in a register that shatters the mind. His goal is not to rule the world, but to unmake it, to return the universe to the silent, static waters of the Nun. The confrontation between Wadjet and Apophis is the central conflict of the Egyptian cosmos. It happens every single night. As the bark reaches the midnight hour, the water of the underworld river begins to boil. The boat shudders. Apophis rises. He opens his mouth, a cavern of nothingness, attempting to swallow the water so the boat will crash. The crew of the boat, Heka, magic, Sia, perception, and even the mighty Set, who stands at the prow, are paralyzed by the thunder of the void. Only the eye remains focused. Wadjet does not blink. She cannot blink. She engages Apophis in a battle of gazes. This is the stare of the Uraeus. She projects her Akhet fire directly into the eyes of the Chaos Serpent. This is a battle of wills. Wadjet represents the Ma'at, truth, of the Cobra, the focused, disciplined strike. Apophis represents the Isfet, chaos, of the Python, the constricting, mindless hunger. Wadjet's fire is specific. It targets the sensory organs of the enemy. She burns his eyes so he cannot see the boat. She burns his tongue so he cannot utter the spells of uncreation. The ancient hymns chant, "The Great One has severed thy spine, O Apep. The flame of the Uraeus is in thy soul. She has cooked thy flesh. She has shriveled thy coils." This imagery of cooking is pervasive in the underworld books. Wadjet is the oven. The enemies of Ra are the raw material that must be destroyed. Her venom is the heat that breaks down their substance. This is total annihilation. In Egyptian theology, the second death was the ultimate fear, the complete destruction of the soul, so that no afterlife was possible. Wadjet is the agent of this second death. For the righteous, she is a lamp. For the wicked, she is an incinerator. The lake of fire, depicted in the Book of Gates, is often interpreted as a pool of Wadjet's liquid venom. The damned souls are thrown into it, and their shadows are consumed by the red breath of the goddess. The symbolism of the knife is also linked to Wadjet in the Duat. While she is a snake in the artistic depictions of the underworld battles, she is often shown as a woman or a lioness wielding knives. Or the Uraeus itself spits knives instead of fire. These knives represent the cutting nature of truth. Wadjet cuts the connection between the Chaos Serpent and the fabric of reality. She severs the fetters of evil. The phrase Wadjet the knife appears in spells used to ward off nightmares. A nightmare was seen as a leak from the Duat, a tendril of Apophis touching the sleeping mind. By invoking Wadjet, the sleeper called upon the knife to cut that tendril. The crucial concept of Mehen plays a role here. Mehen is another serpent deity, the coiled one, who wraps around the cabin of Ra to protect him. Wadjet and Mehen work in tandem. Mehen is the shield. Wadjet is the sword. Mehen protects the inner sanctum of the god. Wadjet attacks the outer threats. This double serpent defense ensures that Ra is untouchable. The vulnerability we saw in the marshes with the baby Horus is gone. Here, there is only armored, aggressive divinity. The papyrus stalks have been replaced by walls of iron and fire. In the 7th hour of the night, the danger is greatest. Apophis swallows the sun. For a moment, creation flickers. This is the eclipse. But Wadjet does not panic. She enters the belly of the beast. She becomes the burning one inside. She burns Apophis from the inside out, forcing him to vomit the sun back into the sky. This regurgitation is the rebirth. It proves that the order of the Cobra is stronger than the chaos of the viper. The venom of Wadjet acts as an emetic to the cosmos, purging it of the poison of Apophis. The cavern of Sokar is a silent, sandy realm deep in the underworld where the sun god must pass. It is a place of absolute sterility. Here, Wadjet's role shifts from warrior to battery. The solar boat is often towed by jackals or snakes in this region because there is no water. The energy to move comes from the heat of the Uraeus. She provides the propulsion. Her fire animates the dead bodies of the underworld deities, waking them up to pull the rope. "Wake up, sleepers," the texts cry. "The eye is upon you." The gaze of Wadjet is the morning alarm of the dead. When she looks at a mummy, the bandages loosen and the heart begins to beat. She is the spark of life in the land of dust. We must also consider the litany of Re, which lists the 75 forms of the sun god. One of these forms is he who is in the serpent. Ra himself becomes Wadjet. They merge completely. The god becomes the weapon. This fusion is necessary for the final transformation at dawn. As the boat approaches the eastern horizon, the mountain of Baku, the sun must be reborn. It must shed the body of the old, dead sun and emerge as the young scarab, Khepri. Wadjet presides over this shedding. The shedding of snake skin is the primary metaphor for this rebirth. The Egyptians believed that snakes were immortal because they could rejuvenate themselves. Wadjet teaches Ra the secret of the sloughing. She helps him peel away the darkness of the night, the weariness of the journey, and the scars of the battle with Apophis. She acts as the midwife of the morning, just as she was the midwife of Horus in the Marshes. But here, the birth is explosive. The breaking of the shell of the dawn is accompanied by the red light of the rising sun. This red light is the blood of Apophis, spilled by Wadjet during the night battle. The crimson sky is the victory banner of the Cobra. The sounds of the Duat are terrifying. The wailing of the damned, the roaring of waters, the clashing of knives. But the sound of Wadjet is unique. It is the great hiss This sound was believed to have a frequency that repelled demons. In the temple rituals, priests would make a hissing sound to purify the sanctuary before opening the shrine. This was an imitation of Wadjet clearing the path. In the Duat, her hiss is the siren that clears the river. It announces the coming of the king. There is a specific gate known as the Gate of the Serpent. It is guarded by a warden named He who eats his own father. To pass, one must know the secret name of Wadjet. The soul must say, "I know you, O Lady of the Uraeus. Your name is she who cuts heads. Your name is the living flame." By naming her, the soul claims her protection. This power of naming is central to Egyptian magic. Wadjet allows herself to be named by the righteous, but she remains nameless and formless to the wicked, appearing only as a wall of fire. The connection between Wadjet and the star Sirius, Sothis, is also relevant in the underworld context. Sirius was the herald of the flood, but also a guide star. In the darkness of the Duat, Wadjet assumes the properties of a star. She is the star that does not set. She is the navigation point. When the soul is lost in the labyrinth of the afterlife, confused by the shifting illusions of Apophis, the light of Wadjet is the true north. It is the green light of safety amidst the red light of danger. Even the enemies of Ra, the children of rebellion, respect the Uraeus. They know that to touch the boat is to be incinerated. There are depictions of rebels with their arms tied behind their backs, being watched by Wadjet. Her mere presence is the prison. She does not need bars. Her gaze holds them in place. This Medusa effect, petrifying the enemy with fear, is a key attribute of the goddess in the underworld. She freezes the chaotic motion of the demons, turning them into harmless statues. The flame of the Island of Fire is a mythical location in the Duat where the gods are born. Wadjet is the mistress of this island. It is the underworld mirror of the Chemmis Marshes. In the upper world, the island is green and watery. In the underworld, the island is made of fire and light. Wadjet rules both. She is the green reed and the red flame. This symmetry connects the two halves of existence. The Pharaoh hopes to travel from the green island, life, to the island of fire, rebirth, under the protection of the same goddess. As the 12th hour approaches, the tension rises. The serpent Apophis makes one last lunge at the boat, trying to drag it back into the night. This is the moment of the final strike. Wadjet rears up to her full height, expanding her hood until it blocks the view of the void. She spits the final venom. This venom does not just kill, it erases memory. It ensures that Apophis forgets his purpose. It bewilders chaos. The sun slips past the confused serpent and bursts through the eastern gate. The people of Egypt wake up. They see the sun rising. They feel the warmth on their faces. They do not see the battle. They do not see the burns on the hull of the solar bark. They do not see the exhausted, glowing Cobra resting on the brow of the god. They only see the light. But the priests know. The initiates know. They know that the day exists only because Wadjet fought for it. They know that the peace of the morning was bought with the violence of the night. Wadjet's journey through the Duat is the ultimate test of her fidelity. She could have abandoned Ra in the darkness. She could have fled back to the cool marshes. But she stayed. She burned. She fought. This cements her role not just as a protector of the physical body of the king, but as the guardian of the cosmic order itself. She is the loyal Cobra. And as the sun rises, casting its golden light over the temple pylons of Karnak and the mud brick walls of the villages, the Uraeus gleams, ready to begin the cycle all over again. But where does this power come from? Where is the earthly anchor for this celestial drama? To understand the roots of this theology, we must return to the mud. We must go to the city that bears her name. We must walk the streets of Wadjet, smell the incense of her oracle, and witness the festivals where the wine flowed like blood and the people danced the dance of the snake. The myth is written in the sky, but it is acted out in the temple. The home of the goddess awaits. The fire of the sun is eternal, but the fire of the earth requires a hearth. To maintain the cosmic balance, the celestial power of Wadjet had to be anchored in the terrestrial world. It needed a location, a priesthood, and a daily rhythm of service that mirrored the rising and setting of the sun. This anchor was the city of Wadjet, the house of the Green One. Known to the Greeks as Buto, and to the ancient Egyptians as the twin cities of Per and Dep. This metropolis was not merely a political capital. It was the theological nervous system of the north. Here, in the heart of the Delta, surrounded by the very marshes where Isis once hid, the cult of the Cobra goddess flourished for 3,000 years. To walk into Wadjet was to walk into the architectural manifestation of the goddess herself. Unlike the stone canyons of Karnak or Luxor in the south, the temples of the Delta were built of the earth. They were constructed of mud brick, the fertile black soil of the Nile, baked by the son of Ra. The columns were often made of bundles of papyrus reeds, or stone carved to imitate them, creating a forest of stone that rustled in the spiritual wind. The air here smelled of burning Kai-Fi incense, roasting geese, and the wet, metallic scent of the river. It was a sensory landscape designed to placate the predator. The city was divided. P was the city of the souls, the place of the ancestors, the falcon-headed spirits who had ruled before the kings. Dep was the city of the living, the administrative hub. Connecting them was the great temple complex of Wadjet. The temple was known as the Per-Nu, or the Per-Nesret, the House of Flame. This name was a warning. One did not enter the House of Flame casually. The sanctuary was a restricted zone, a place of high-voltage holiness. The walls were decorated with apotropaic Uraeus, rows of rearing cobras carved in relief, spitting fire outward to ward off evil spirits. The message was clear. This is the den of the lioness snake. Enter with purity, or be consumed. At the center of this complex lay the Holy of Holies. Inside the naos, the shrine made of granite or basalt, stood the cult statue of Wadjet. It was likely made of solid gold, with eyes of lapis lazuli or rock crystal. The statue was not just a representation. It was a vessel. Through the ritual of the opening of the mouth, the spirit of the goddess, her Ba, was invited to inhabit the gold. When the high priest stood before this statue, he was standing before the living presence of the Uraeus. He could feel the heat. He could hear the hiss in the silence. The daily ritual of Wadjet was a delicate operation. Every morning before dawn, the high priest would approach the sanctuary. He would break the clay seal on the door, reciting the spell. The finger of Seth is removed from the eye of Horus. This was a declaration that chaos was being banished. He would open the doors and gaze upon the goddess. He would fall to his face, kissing the ground, crying out, "I have seen the lady in her horizon. Her beauty floods the two lands." Then the toilet of the god began. The statue was treated as a living queen. The priest would wash the gold skin with water from the sacred lake. He would purify it with natron. He would clothe the serpent in linen cloth, green linen for vitality, red linen for power. He would adorn her with jewelry, placing miniature Uraeus upon the Uraeus. He would offer her food, bread, beer, oxen, and fowl. But the most important offering was Ma'at. The priest would present a small figure of the goddess of truth to the Cobra. This was the theological contract. We offer you order, so that you do not unleash chaos. We offer you truth, so that you do not strike in anger. The Oracle of Buto was perhaps the most famous aspect of her cult, renowned even beyond the borders of Egypt. Long before the Greeks consulted Delphi, the Egyptians consulted Wadjet. The oracle functioned through the movement of the god. On festival days, the statue of Wadjet would be placed in a portable bark shrine and carried on the shoulders of the priests. The people would gather in the forecourt, shouting their questions. Will the harvest be good? Will the king return from war? Is this man guilty of theft? The priests, entering a trance state, would feel the weight of the goddess shift. If the bark dipped forward, it was a yes. If it recoiled backward, it was a no. This was the Han, the divine nod. But there were also the whisperers Within the temple, there were mediums, likely women, who were possessed by the spirit of the goddess. They would speak in glossolalia or in riddles, which the priests would interpret. These were the voices of the marsh. The wind rustling through the papyrus groves of the temple garden was also read as a text. The priests of Wadjet were meteorologists of the spirit. They read the wind and the snake's movement to determine the will of heaven. The connection to the Greek goddess Leto is significant here. When the Greeks arrived in Egypt, they saw in Wadjet a parallel to Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Leto, too, was a goddess of protection who had suffered to bring her children into the world. But the Egyptian Wadjet was far more ancient and far more terrifying. The Greeks marveled at the floating island of Chemmis near the temple, a piece of land that allegedly moved across the sacred lake. Herodotus wrote of this with wonder. To the Egyptians, this moving island was the physical proof of the myth. The land itself was Ayum, shifting to hide the god. Festivals were the heartbeat of the city. The most important was the going forth of Wadjet. This was a celebration of her return from the south, the distant goddess myth, and her triumphant procession through the land. The goddess was carried out of the temple in her golden boat. The air would be filled with the sound of sistrums, the rattle sacred to Hathor and Wadjet. The sistrum makes a sound like wind in the reeds, a sound that was believed to soothe the anger of the goddess. If the music stopped, the red heat might return. So the musicians played frantically, keeping the atmosphere joyous and loud to keep the lioness asleep and the cobra calm. Alcohol played a crucial ritual role. The festival of drunkenness, Tek, was not a mere party. It was a theological necessity. In the myth of the destruction of mankind, the eye of Ra, Sekhmet/Wadjet, is tricked into drinking red beer that looks like blood. She becomes drunk and forgets to kill humans. Therefore, to keep Wadjet benevolent, the people of Buto had to drink. They drank beer dyed red with ochre or pomegranate juice. They drank wine from the Delta vineyards. The goal was a state of sacred intoxication, a communal ecstasy where the fear of the goddess was replaced by the love of her protection. The streets of Per and Dep would be filled with revelers staggering under the influence of the red water, chanting hymns to the Lady of the Drunkenness. The dance of the snake was likely performed by the priestesses. We see depictions of dancers performing acrobatic feats, bending their bodies backward into arches that defy human anatomy. This was an imitation of the fluid, spine-bending movement of the cobra. By moving like the snake, the dancers invoked her energy. They became avatars of flexibility and grace. The dance was hypnotic, designed to mesmerize the onlookers, just as the cobra mesmerizes its prey. But the cult was not just about festivals. It was about law. Wadjet was a goddess of justice. In the Delta, the laws of Buto were cited in legal disputes. The Uraeus on the king's brow was the ultimate judge, and her temple was a courthouse. Oaths taken in the name of Wadjet were binding. To break an oath to the Cobra was to invite a bite, either literal or metaphorical. A sudden illness, a fever, or a stroke was seen as the bite of Wadjet punishing a perjurer. The field of the god around the temple was a sanctuary for refugees. If a person fleeing from justice or a slave fleeing a cruel master entered the sacred precinct of Wadjet, they could not be touched. The boundary of the temple was the boundary of the goddess's hood. Within it, all were under her protection. The offering of the Uraeus bread was a specific rite. Special loaves, baked in the shape of coiled snakes, were offered to the goddess and then eaten by the priests. This was a form of communion. By eating the image of the goddess, the priests internalized her power. They became keepers of the flame. These priests were also famous as healers. The Wab priests of Sekhmet and Wadjet were the doctors of ancient Egypt. They knew the secrets of venom. They knew that the poison of the snake, in minute doses, could cure heart conditions or ease pain. The temple of Buto was a hospital where the sick came to be bitten by the healing snakes, non-venomous serpents trained to lick the wounds of the faithful, or simply to sleep beside them to transfer their vitality. The souls of Pi, the ancestor spirits depicted as falcon-headed figures, were the eternal entourage of Wadjet. They represented the prehistoric rulers of the north. In every coronation scene, the souls of Pi shown kneeling, hailing the new king. This signifies that the ancestral spirits of the Delta, under the command of Wadjet, accepted the new ruler. Wadjet was the bridge between the archaic past and the dynastic present. She held the memory of the time of the gods. The landscape of the temple included the Isharu, a sacred lake in a crescent or horseshoe shape. This lake represented the primeval waters of Nun. Wadjet was the mistress of the lake. During the rituals, model boats were floated on the water, reenacting the journey of the sun god, or the search for Osiris. The water of the Isharu was considered to be charged with Heka. Pilgrims would bottle it and take it home to sprinkle on their fields or their children. It was green water, the water of life. We must also imagine the house of the Uraeus, a specific chamber within the temple where live cobras were kept. These were not ordinary snakes. They were considered living manifestations of the goddess. The priests would feed them milk and honey. They would observe their movements to predict the future. If the snakes were sluggish, it was a bad omen. If they were active and rearing, the goddess was alert. The handling of these deadly creatures required immense skill and faith. The Silly, the snake charmers of the Delta, were a hereditary caste who claimed immunity to venom. They were the servants of Wadjet, who could walk barefoot through a pit of vipers and remain unharmed. The feast of the 10th day was a procession where the statue of Wadjet visited the necropolis of Buto. She was the lady of the cemetery. Just as she protected the living king, she protected the dead ancestors. She moved through the tombs, her presence burning away the shadows and the eaters of souls. The families of the dead would bring offerings, hoping that the Green One would remember their names. To be remembered by Wadjet was to be immortal. To be forgotten by her was to be devoured by the void. In the Ptolemaic period, the city of Buto remained a vibrant center, even as the Greeks brought their own gods. The Greeks were terrified and fascinated by the animal-headed gods of Egypt. Wadjet, with her cobra head, was a source of awe. They identified her with the moon as well as the sun, seeing in her the cycle of phases. The eye became a symbol of lunar fullness as well as solar intensity. The city became a melting pot of theology, where Greek philosophy met Egyptian magic in the shadow of the reed columns. The domestic cult of Wadjet was also widespread. In the humble mud brick homes of the farmers, small clay figurines of rearing cobras were placed in niches near the door. These were the household Wadjets. They protected the home from scorpions, snakes, and thieves. The peasant woman, grinding grain, would mutter a prayer to Wadjet to keep the granary safe from rats. The fisherman, casting his net in the marshes, would ask Wadjet for a good catch and protection from crocodiles. She was not just the distant goddess of the Pharaoh. She was the neighbor of the common man. She was the danger and the safety of their daily lives. The amulet of the 2 fingers, representing the fingers of Horus or Isis, is often associated with Wadjet's help in the birth of Horus. But the most common amulet was the Uraeus itself. Soldiers wore it for courage. Pregnant women wore it for the protection of the nest. To wear the snake was to say, "I am dangerous. I am protected." It was a psychological armor. As the sun set over the city of Wadjet, the temple gates would be closed and sealed. But the vigil did not end. The priests would mount the roof of the temple to watch the stars. They were watching for the imperishable ones. They were watching the celestial movements of the goddess. Down in the marshes, the real cobras would emerge from their burrows to hunt in the cool of the night. The city slept, wrapped in the coils of the great Green One. The silence of the Delta night was not empty. It was heavy with the presence of the Guardian. The oracle had spoken. The king was safe. The sun would rise again. But the story of Wadjet does not end with the fall of the pharaohs. Stone crumbles and mud brick dissolves into the rain. But ideas are harder to kill. The Green One was about to undergo her final transformation. She would merge, shift, and hide within the new religions and the new empires. She would become a symbol of alchemy, of healing, and of the eternal feminine mystery. In the final chapter of our saga, we will trace the legacy of Wadjet through the shifting sands of time. We will see how the Cobra goddess survived the end of her civilization to become a universal symbol of wisdom and eternity. We will look at the syncretism with other goddesses, her presence in the magical papyri of the Roman era, and her lingering shadow in the modern mind. The snake sheds its skin, but the snake remains. Stone temples may crumble into dust, and the names of kings may be erased by the wind, but the archetypes that rise from the deepest fears and hopes of humanity are immortal. Wadjet, the great Cobra of the Delta, did not die when the last priest of Buto closed the sanctuary doors. She did not vanish when the fires of the Persian, Greek, and Roman conquests swept through the land. Instead, true to her nature as the serpent, she shed her skin. She sloughed off the rigid identity of the local goddess of Pe and Dep, and revealed a new, shimmering form beneath, a universal principle of protection, wisdom, and the terrifying beauty of the divine feminine. This final chapter of her saga is not a story of decline, but a story of transformation. It is the story of how the Green One became the Eternal One. In the later periods of Egyptian history, the boundaries between the gods became fluid. This phenomenon, known as syncretism, was not a confusion of identities, but a theological recognition that all divine powers were facets of a single, diamond-like reality. Wadjet, the Eye of Ra, began to merge with her sister deities. She merged with Sekhmet, the lioness. In statues from the New Kingdom onwards, we often see a figure with the body of a woman and the head of a lioness, crowned with the solar disk and the Uraeus. Is this Sekhmet? Is it Wadjet? Is it Mut? It is all of them. It is the solar eye in its complete form. The logic of this merger is rooted in the distant goddess myth we explored earlier. When the eye is angry, she is the lioness, Sekhmet. When she is pacified, she is the cobra, Wadjet. But the Egyptians realized that these two states exist simultaneously. The cobra carries the fire of the lioness in her venom. The lioness carries the swift strike of the cobra in her claws. Thus, Wadjet Sekhmet became the ultimate warrior goddess. She was invoked in battle not just as a protector of the king, but as a destroyer of armies. The arrow of the king is the bite of Wadjet, the texts say. The arrow flies with the speed of the snake and strikes with the force of the lion. She also merged with Bastet, the cat goddess of Bubastis. Bastet is the gentler aspect of the eye, the goddess of the home, perfume, and joy. But even Bastet has a hidden Uraeus. When the cat is cornered, she hisses. That hiss is the voice of Wadjet. The Wadjet Bastet figures represent the protective mother who guards the cradle. The amulet of the cat with a snake between its paws or on its head became a favorite of the common people. It symbolized that the playfulness of life, the cat, was always guarded by the seriousness of death, the cobra. In the great city of Thebes, the goddess Mut, the mother goddess, the consort of Amun, absorbed Wadjet. Mut is often depicted wearing the double crown. As the Lady of Isharu, the sacred lake, Mut took on the characteristics of the marsh goddess. She became the Eye of Ra in the south. This meant that Wadjet had effectively conquered the theology of the entire country. She was no longer just the Lady of the North. She was the Lady of Heaven, incorporated into the supreme triad of Thebes. The arrival of the Greeks marked a strange and fascinating chapter in Wadjet's life. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descending from the generals of Alexander the Great, did not suppress the native religion. They became obsessed with it. They saw in the animal-headed gods of Egypt a profound, mystical wisdom that their own Olympian gods lacked. They identified Wadjet with Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Why Leto? Because Leto, too, was a goddess who had been persecuted, who had wandered seeking a place to give birth, and who had finally found safety on a floating island, Delos. The Greeks saw the parallel with Isis and Wadjet in the floating island of Chemmis, but the Greek mind also added a layer of philosophical abstraction. The Uraeus became the basileia, the symbol of sovereignty itself. It was no longer just a snake. It was the abstract concept of divine right. The queens of the Ptolemaic era, Arsinoe, Berenice, and the famous Cleopatras, wore the Uraeus with a fervor that matched the old pharaohs. For a Greek woman to wear the cobra was a statement of immense power. It meant she was not just a consort. She was a goddess incarnate. She was the new Isis, and therefore she was under the protection of Wadjet. The death of Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of ancient Egypt, is perhaps the most famous snake bite in history. While Roman historians like Plutarch dramatize it as a suicide by an asp, an Egyptian cobra, hidden in a basket of figs. From a mythological perspective, this was a ritual act. Cleopatra, facing the humiliation of being paraded in a Roman triumph, chose to die by the symbol of her own royalty. She did not use a knife or poison. She used the Uraeus. By letting the cobra bite her, she was not just killing herself. She was communing with Wadjet. She was returning to the source. The bite of the Uraeus was believed to grant immortality to the righteous ruler. It was the kiss of the goddess. In her final moment, the Queen of Kings surrendered her sovereignty back to the guardian of the Delta, ensuring that she would remain a goddess in the eyes of her people forever. In the Roman period, Wadjet survived in the shadows of the magical underground. The Greek magical papyri are full of spells that mix Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and Babylonian names. Wadjet appears here as a force of nature. She is invoked to cure blindness, to reveal thieves, and to grant invisibility. I call upon thee, the Green One, the Lady of the Flame, whose name shakes the foundations of the earth. The magicians of Alexandria understood that the old gods had not died. They had merely gone into the ether. To command a spirit, one needed the authority of the Uraeus. The image of the snake biting its own tail, the Ouroboros, became a central symbol of Gnosticism and alchemy during this time. While distinct from the Uraeus, the Ouroboros carries the DNA of Wadjet, the cycle of time, the shedding of skin, the enclosure of the world. Wadjet is the first circle. The medical legacy of Wadjet is also profound. The snake has always been a symbol of healing, the pharmakon, both poison and cure. The rod of Asclepius and the caduceus of Hermes both feature serpents. While these are Greek symbols, the Egyptian influence is undeniable. The priests of Wadjet were the first to understand the nervous system, which the venom attacks. They understood that the power to kill is the power to cure. In the Coptic Christian period, Christ was sometimes depicted stepping on serpents, symbolizing the triumph over the old gods, or over Satan. But in the local folklore, the reverence for the snake remained. The agathos daimon, or the good spirit, was often depicted as a snake in Roman Egypt, protecting the house. This was Wadjet domesticated. She became the household luck. Let us look at the Waj amulet one last time. This column of green feldspar, or faience, shaped like a papyrus stalk, was placed on the necks of millions of mummies. It represents the spine of the deceased, staying upright, staying green. It is the hope of resurrection. It is the promise that the dry desert of death will eventually yield to the green flood of life. Even today, in the design of columns in architecture, the echoes of the papyrus reeds of Buto can be seen. Every time we see a pillar that flares at the top, we are looking at the stylized habitat of Wadjet. But the most enduring legacy of Wadjet is psychological. She represents the terrifying protector. In the human psyche, there is a deep need for a mother figure who is not just nurturing, but dangerous. A mother who can kill the wolf. A mother who has fangs. Wadjet is this archetype. She is the fierce love that sets boundaries. She is the anger that defends the innocent. In a world that often demands women to be passive, Wadjet and her sisters Sekhmet and Isis stand as reminders of the active, aggressive power of the feminine divine. She does not ask for permission to strike. She strikes because it is necessary for Ma'at. The third eye concept in modern spirituality owes a debt to the Uraeus. The idea that there is a center of power in the forehead, a place of vision and enlightenment, is visualized perfectly by the Cobra. The yogi seeks to raise the Kundalini serpent from the base of the spine to the crown of the head. The Pharaoh had already achieved this. The Uraeus is the raised serpent. It is the externalized kundalini of the state. It signifies that the king has mastered his lower instincts and raised his consciousness to the level of the solar fire. Wadjet is the enlightened one. As we stand at the end of this journey, looking back over the millennia, the image of Wadjet remains clear. We see her in the green sway of the papyrus. We see her in the red heat of the noon sun. We see her in the golden mask of Tutankhamun, staring at us from the museum case with unblinking eyes of obsidian and quartz. She is the silence of the desert and the noise of the marsh. She is the beginning and the end of the pharaonic dream. The temples are ruins now. The great city of Buto is a mound of earth, dissolving back into the mud from which it came. The hymns are silent, but the Cobra still lives. She lives in the behavior of the Najahaje that still slithers through the irrigation canals of modern Egypt. She lives in the heat that rises from the asphalt of Cairo. And she lives in the imagination of every person who hears the story of the ancient gods and feels a shiver of awe. Wadjet teaches us that true power is not about size. It is about focus. It is about the ability to rear up when threatened, to expand one's presence, and to strike with precision only when the order of the world is at stake. She teaches us that we must be green, fresh, alive, adaptable, but we must also carry the fire, the passion, and the strength to defend what we love. The sun sets on the western horizon. The sky turns the color of blood and fire. The darkness gathers, but we do not fear the night, for we know that on the brow of the invisible sun the great serpent is awake. She is watching the gates. She is spitting fire into the face of the void, and she will ensure that the sun rises again tomorrow. Thank you for journeying with me through the mists of the Delta, through the fire of the Uraeus, and into the eternal green of the afterlife. We have walked the path of the Cobra, from her birth in the mud to her ascent to the stars. If you found peace in the presence of the Green One, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the complete saga of Wadjet, please leave a like and subscribe to Hearths of Myths. May your own walls be strong. May your own inner Uraeus be vigilant. And may you always flourish like the papyrus in the cool waters of the river. Sleep well.